Mi padre nació el 22 de junio en el año 1970 y mi madre nació 7 años después en el 20 de junio del año 1977. Los dos nacieron cerca de una ciudad llamada Estanzuelas en El Salvador. The Civil War in El Salvador started soon after my mother was born, in 1979, and ended in 1992. Both of my parents grew up under different circumstances and experienced the Civil War differently. My father was forced to partake in the war, never really knowing what side he was fighting for. Meanwhile, my mother has no recollection of what happened during that time other than the violence she saw. They were most impacted by the post-Civil War era, forced to move out of the country they called home, just like the other 2 million people that migrated during the war. A large percentage of Salvadorans who fled the country during the war initially arrived in Pico Union, located in central Los Angeles, California. The displacing of Salvadoran residents into the United States was followed by the erasure of their Salvadoran Spanish. In the 1980s, there was a high concentration of Spanish-speaking Mexicans located in Pico Union. This is still the case today, resulting in Mexicanization. This term means that Salvadorans adopt certain ways of speaking, behavior, and cultural repertoires that will allow them to fit in Mexican communities, which are the more dominant Latinx communities in Southern California.
You're not Mexican?
Hell no, I'm Salvadoran, baby!
Spanish-speaking communities have similarities in their dialects, as they sound similar and have overlap in phonological, morphological, syntactic, and lexical behavior, but it is not the same dialect. Morphology is the study of words, phonology is the study of sounds. This research focuses on the distinctive verbal morphology associated with voceo and tuteo use. Vos and tu are both different versions of the second singular pronoun you. Tuteo is the use of the word tu and is used in standard Spanish. In contrast, voceo is often rejected by the upper class and is typically linked to intimacy and Central American individuals. In this study, voceo as a form is stigmatized and not supported in the area surrounding Pico Union because there is not a big enough Salvadoran community to support the use of voceo. The lack of retention for voceo can be seen within a conversation among a Salvadoran family in Los Angeles. While I grew up in a Salvadoran household, only speaking Spanish to my parents, finding participants was difficult. I had to take a step back and realize there were several factors that could have prevented first-generation Salvadoran migrants from speaking with me. Under the Trump administration in 2018, Salvadorans were stripped of their right to temporary protective status, which allowed them to work in the United States legally and live freely without worrying about being deported. Because of the pandemic, this status has continued to be extended, but not guaranteed to these Salvadoran Americans. I recognize that there is hesitancy behind talking to a person that they do not know. Also, given their experiences in El Salvador and the lack of trust within and outside of families in El Salvador, this translates in the United States as well, especially since the United States has a history of invalidating Salvadorans' experiences through denial of resources and refugee status. Nonetheless, I continued to send out flyers through social media and was eventually contacted by a family from Echo Park, only 4 miles away from Pico Union. The family includes a 60-year-old father, a 31-year-old daughter, and her 34-year-old husband. The father has been living in the United States for 40 years and migrated at the start of the war. The 31-year-old daughter identifies as a second-generation Salvadoran migrant who has visited El Salvador a few times. Her husband identifies as a 1.5 generation migrant since he was born in El Salvador but has lived in the United States for approximately 30 years and has not returned since. Changes in morphology and other Spanish speech patterns were brought into Central America by Spanish colonizers. The use of voceo implies either an insult, intimate familiarity, or social superiority. The areas where voceo predominates today were marginalized regions that did not participate in linguistic changes that were occurring in Spain due to economic, political, and cultural isolation in which they found themselves. They were areas that did not attract a large number of nobles, priests, intellectuals, etc., who in the richer and more cultured regions were responsible for spreading linguistic uses, among which was the tuteo. Later, some regions abandoned voceo in response to the continuous and accelerated influx of Spanish immigrants, while other regions, marginalized from the metropolis, have maintained the voceo to this day. In the data collected, all opportunities where voceo could have been utilized, it was not. There was 100% tuteo usage. In this case, the daughter utilizes tuteo form saying tú tienes razón instead of vos tenés razón. The lack of voceo usage demonstrates their reluctance to speak Salvadoran Spanish because it is not the most common Spanish dialect spoken in their Los Angeles community. According to the father, his daughter has never utilized voceo. Although voceo is not used, other Salvadoran speech patterns, which include phonological features such as S aspiration and Y epenthesis, are still retained among the family. Aspiration of the letter S is when the S sound is weakened before a consonant or at the end of the word. An example of this is with the sentence,
Buenos días.
You can hear these differences in speech across all participants. For instance, the father talking about changing his speech to fit in with Mexicans around him.
Como nos relacionábamos cuando nosotros veníamos, no había muchos salvadoreños acá, entonces nos relacionábamos. Instead of saying, como nos relacionábamos cuando nosotros veníamos, no había muchos salvadoreños acá, entonces nos relacionábamos.
This can also be seen when the son-in-law is speaking about his parents' decision to migrate.
Mis padres decidieron venirse al final. En ese tiempo debía haber tenido 2 años, quizás. Instead of saying, mis padres decidieron venirse al final. En ese tiempo debía haber tenido 2 años, quizás.
But this is not the case when the daughter enlightens her dad that there can be dialects within one language, and then there are also dialects spoken by indigenous people.
Está como diciendo que lo nuestro es superior y lo demás es inferior.
The father's linguistic choice affected his daughter. He falls into this ideology that, as a Salvadoran in the United States, you accept Mexicanization. You accept that's how the United States looks at you.
These changes in speech are also seen when looking for the Salvadoran speech pattern of Y epenthesis. The Y epenthesis adds a Y between accented I and A. It's important to note that in the following conversation, the father also expresses forgetting the word cuchumbo, implying a loss of Salvadoran slang Spanish. Yo me acuerdo cuando vi que la dimos a que no las cuidaran, no la cuidaba una babysitter, fue la única que cuidaron y un día vino a la casa y dijo, ¿y dónde está el cuchumbo? Instead of saying, y un día.
The daughter and son-in-law both indicated uses of Salvadoran speech patterns, but at a lesser rate than the father. This indicates that they have both experienced a degree of Mexicanization. Language is a manifestation of resistance and negotiation of identity. The Salvadoran Spanish dialect varies within one family. The first-generation migrant parents were able to hold on to phonological and morphosyntactic features of Salvadoran speech. Meanwhile, the second-generation adult children indicate no use of the morphosyntactic features. It is important to bridge the gap between both generations. Because of the high number of hesitancy to share past experiences, there is a lack of awareness of the long-term effects the Salvadoran Civil War had on first-generation migrants. This hesitancy to share could also be why the second generation has less of a conscious decision over not speaking Salvadoran Spanish.
Ultimately, participants demonstrated a lack of voceo usage and instead utilizing tuteo in addition to a varying presence of phonology uses such as S aspiration and Y epenthesis.
This research has been conducted with only one family that lived in Echo Park. This is not to say all families have changed their way of speaking Spanish, and it is not a clear indicator of the level of change that has occurred in their Salvadoran Spanish dialect. This only depicts the influence being in a large Mexican community has on linguistic choice for the first generation, but there is room to explore more how it affects the second generation as well. Recently, there has been a movement in the second-generation Central American migrant community to reclaim voceo, which is depicted in this image where the original writing was no es lo que tienes, lo que haces, sino lo que eres, and someone changed it from tuteo form to voceo form stating No es lo que tenés, lo que haces, sino lo que sos. I only hope to be able to hear my peers reclaim their linguistic heritage, further increasing Central American representation.